For the St. Louis Press Club, welcome to another edition of our In the Now series, interviews with journalism professionals in the St. Louis area. I'm Dale Singer, a retired journalist with 45 years of experience in St. Louis and a member of the Press Club board. And our guest today is...
Hi, I'm Alan Achkar. I'm the executive editor at the Post-Dispatch.
Great. Alan, give us a little idea about your career, including your stops in St. Louis.
Right. So this is actually my second stop in St. Louis. My journalism career after college actually started in Cleveland, which is my hometown. It's where I grew up and spent most of my childhood. And I started working at that local newspaper, the Plain Dealer, and was there for quite a long time as both a reporter and editor, and then had an opportunity to come to St. Louis to serve as an editor. Eventually became the Metro editor, which meant overseeing all the local news coverage. So I was here in St. Louis for 8 years, from 2005 to 2013, left to go to South Bend, Indiana, home of Notre Dame, to become the executive editor of that newsroom there, the South Bend Tribune, and then later became a regional editor, bought us, and then had an opportunity to come back to St. Louis just last year. In fact, it's been almost exactly a year since I returned to be the executive editor. So back in St. Louis is my second stop, back at the Post-Dispatch. And honestly, these days, it's.com is really the engine we focus on. But of course, it's the work and the great journalism with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So happy to be back and back in St. Louis.
So when you got back here, what changes did you notice both in the area and in the newspaper?
So, of course, let's talk about the Post-Dispatch. We were in a new building. We moved, in fact, our old building is behind me that way on Tucker. We're in a smaller building, but it suits our needs well here. We're between 10th and 11th Street. So, of course, there was a physical change, lots of new faces, and, of course, even more attention on STL today and what we're doing in the digital space. Dale, when you were at the Post-Dispatch, you remember we were still in the early stages of figuring out this digital stuff.
I remember it well, yes.
Yes. I mean, it has evolved so much. It really is our primary focus now, which is not to say we don't care about print, but the digital numbers are growing, which is very exciting. We're adding digital readers and subscribers at a very rapid rate. So that's really exciting. That's where you can see the growth occurring. Obviously, technology is driving that, and we're adapting to technology. And so as the print readership, let's be honest, it's one that's declining. But we know that a lot of folks are following us now. They're making the switch to our digital platforms, whether it's the e-edition or the website or the app. And those numbers are growing. So that means we've got a very large and growing audience that we can cater to. So that's very exciting. The digital audience is much larger than when I was here the first time, which means also the way we cover stories, how we present information has to change and has changed dramatically as well. So that's been great. In terms of the St. Louis region, it's interesting to see how much has stayed the same. It's very comfortable. It's very familiar. But of course, the struggles that we're seeing with downtown and with crime and with continuing racial, neighborhood, and political disagreements, those seem to have only intensified since I left, and I know the city is still struggling with those issues. So that's a concern. But it also helps us focus our coverage to a certain degree as well. So that's a kind of a nice summary of changes I've seen both at the Post-Dispatch, but also in the community.
So I understand during the move that a plaque of the Pulitzer Platform was discovered that nobody really quite remembered it was. Talk about that and talk about the relevance of the platform, both from a news standpoint and, I guess, editorial page.
Sure. So the platform, which was a fantastic, let's just call it a creed or a motto or a mission statement that Joseph Pulitzer wrote in 1907 when he was retiring. Of course, Joseph Pulitzer, the founder of the Post-Dispatch, and the Pulitzer Prize named after him, of course. Legendary figure in journalism, the founder of the Post-Dispatch. That platform, which is about a paragraph long, was in very large letters on the main lobby wall of the old Post-Dispatch building on Tucker. When you walked into the building to the front doors, you could not help but see the platform right there on the wall. Well, I'm thrilled that when we moved, we actually have, it's not quite as large, we do have actually a couple of different plaques of the platform, one here on the second floor, one on the third floor. So we kept the words, they are still on the walls here, because the platform has always been the soul of the Post-Dispatch. And we like very much to remember where we came from and what our founder's mission was, because I think it's just as relevant today as it was 100 plus years ago. The platform, I'm looking at a copy right now, by the way, that's why I'm looking down. But he talked about progress, reform, not tolerating injustice or corruption, not belonging to any party, so remaining nonpartisan and independent, holding public officials to account, and always be, quote, drastically independent, never be afraid to attack wrong, whether by predatory bureaucracy or predatory poverty. And again, the direct quotes, never tolerate injustice or corruption, always fight demagogues of all parties, never belong to any party. And so what a fantastic mission statement about journalism and holding public officials accountable, fighting for the underprivileged, making sure you're covering their needs and their issues, remaining ethical, remaining away from partisanship. These are all concepts that are just as vital today as they were in 1907. I would argue, Dale, they're even more vital in, as I mentioned, moving to this digital era. Well, one of the things newspapers have struggled with is we no longer have a monopoly on people's attention spans. So back in the day, you got your information from newspapers, TV, maybe radio, and that's it. What technology has done is really force us to fight for people's attention spans, and they are bombarded, literally bombarded with information on their phones or their laptops, desktops. There's such a mountain of information coming at people at any given time. A lot of that is bad information. And so when a legitimate news organization can provide ethical, well-researched, well-founded stories that can resonate and highlight important issues, we can cut through that clutter, get people's attention, but also serve a very important public service. I think the platform is more important today than it's ever been. I think when we talk about shifting to the digital age, those principles are just as vital, and in fact, will allow us to thrive, because I can show you digital metrics that show when we do really great, solid enterprise investigative journalism that's really rooted in the principles of the platform, they find very strong readership. They help move digital subscriptions. We get big readership numbers. And so it's the audience telling us they value that really great journalism. And I don't care if you have a newsroom of 5 people, 50 people, or 500 people. They are principles that can be applied across any newsroom. And like I said, there's an audience for that in the digital space, which I find exciting, but also reaffirming these are the right principles that we need to continue pursuing.
So does is the relevance of the platform not only news, but also editorial? And is editorial part of your portfolio?
So it is. We're talking about the editorial board, which writes the editorials, which is the opinion arm of the company, separate from the newsroom. So the two do not mix. The editorial writers don't get involved in news stories, and news reporters don't get involved in editorial or opinion writing. And absolutely, the principle applies to editorial. In fact, the editorial board published a piece just 2 years ago reaffirming the Pulitzer Platform and saying, look, we're not trying to take sides. We have certain values and certain principles, and we will go with the politicians that promise to reflect these principles and values. So that is something that the editorial board has said publicly that they aspire to. So I think it does apply to editorial. And of course, as I mentioned, absolutely applies to news. And it's the kind of culture with the news reporters that we want to continue to develop here.
How does the platform influence what you decide to cover? I guess the broader question is, what factors go into decide? You've got a shrinking staff, much smaller staff than you used to. So obviously, some things have to be covered, and some things have to be, unfortunately, not covered. How do you make that decision?
So, we still have, I think, the largest newsroom in the region, by the way. So, yes, shrinking, but still sizable. We can still cover a lot of ground and still do a lot of great stories. And that being said, Dale, to your point, we do have to make different choices and we have to make priorities because we can't be everywhere in every part of the region. And so, what goes in that decision? Yes, it's some of the same principles as the platform, which is this a story that is about corruption, is about the underserved, is about holding power to account? Those are absolutely the types of stories we try to make a priority and that we want to pursue. So they go right in line with the platform. And, in the digital age, metrics also give us a good idea of the types of stories people are reading. Now, you got to be careful. We could post 20 cat videos a day and get large readership. Okay, I get that. Is that something a responsible news organization should do? No. But what we can say is, look, we did this great investigation. We did this great story about corruption, and it got really good readership and reaction. It maybe prompted some action by a public agency. We know that that's the kind of work we want to keep pursuing. So we can make some informed decisions based on data, but at the end of the day, the data seems to be, as I mentioned, reaffirming what our principles are, which is great. That means there's a market and audience for great investigative enterprise journalism, the kind of journalism that the platform encourages. And those are the types of stories we do want to focus on. And I've said numerous times, if we're onto a great story, I would rather a home run than 5 singles. In other words, we'll let some stories go if it means we can get a really, really great, unique, exclusive investigation or enterprise story done, because that needs to be a priority right now, because that's the kind of journalism that makes a difference and that can find an audience.
How does the growing importance of online influence what you cover?
I mean, it influences everything. It has to. As I mentioned, that audience is growing. Every day, the numbers going up, both just general readership, but also paid digital subscribers. So it does have to inform our decisions. And so it really, it focuses more, Dale, on how do we present the story? Is it a standard text story that's written in a certain way? Very often the answer is yes, but we can layer in videos. We can layer in photo galleries. We can present, maybe write the story a little bit differently. We can, a story, breaking things down to tell people how, why, or what happened, but how and why it happened, tend to work well in the digital space. So bringing a level of analysis to a story, we find in digital space can find a very strong audience. Obviously, I mentioned multimedia features that we can add to a story that can really help bring it to life. What time of day we post the story can have a difference in the digital space. The kind of headline. We have more space to write longer headlines than we do in the paper. So that allows us longer headlines. Okay, what do you want to say with those extra words? And be careful what you say, but let's also write a headline that's compelling, that will draw people into the story. We can also link to related stories to get people reading more on the topic. And so I think the discussion is more about how we present the stories and the layers we can build into it, which again opens up all kinds of exciting possibilities. And so we focus a lot on not just on here's the story, but it's also, well, how are we going to write it? What's the headline? When are we going to publish it? What other components can we add to it?
So look back a year or so ago when you were being interviewed. If someone had asked you, what's your journalistic philosophy? What's the your elevator speech of what you think journalism should try to do? What would you say?
Well, I'm going to actually tie it back to where we started. When I was first introduced in a newsroom and I gave my little introductory speech, I leaned heavily on the platform, Dale. And what I said was, I believe in a newsroom that's tough, that's pursuing tough stories, that is aggressive, that is doing meaningful work. People get into journalism because they want to do meaningful work that can find an audience, compel change, or entertain, or excite, or compel people. That's why journalists get into this industry. You want to do compelling work that moves people. Well, that's exactly the kind of work I want our newsroom to produce. And again, I don't care if you have a newsroom of 5 people or 5,000 people. This is on really compelling journalism, doing enterprising work, or really great work on features or the arts community or any range of subjects, and presenting it well. It's going to find an audience, whether it's in print or digital or any platform you want. And so I go back to those principles again with the platform of highlighting corruption, holding public officials to account, producing compelling work, remaining independent. If we do all of that, that means we've got a newsroom that is tough, aggressive, and producing compelling work. That's the kind of newsroom I want. And that's what we're trying to build here.
So given the financial realities of journalism today,
I should say, this newsroom has a legacy of producing that kind of work, by the way. I don't want to imply that somehow that's not being, what I'm talking about is continuing that legacy and building on the great work that's been done here for decades. I just want to add that thought. Sorry, you had another question.
That's okay. No, I was just going to talk about the financial realities. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get a newsroom of 5,000 people anytime soon, right? So, the staff is smaller than it used to be. How does budget affect what you cover? Like an example is I was looking at the paper this morning, the sports page. Sports page must have the biggest staff for a specific topic, and also the biggest travel budget, certainly, than other places do. But there's no advertising very, very often today. I think there was one ad that was not a house ad. So does budget, in terms of what your income is, does that affect how you decide what to cover?
No. I mean, yes and no. Obviously, we have certain financial realities, but when you say sports has the biggest number of people per se, I'm not sure I haven't looked at it that way. They do have the biggest travel budget because, especially for the Cardinals and Blues, we go to all the away games. So yes, they do have the biggest travel budget. But if it's a really good news story or a really good sports story, we will spend the money to cover it. Period. End of story. Now, would we spend $1 million? Obviously not. But if it means sending someone to travel for a really good story, we'll do it. And with sports, yes, travel continues to remain a priority because you're talking about ads, I think, in the print edition. But I got to tell you, in the digital space, though, Dale, sports really moves the needle. They move the needle in terms of audience, in terms of digital subscriptions. So print advertising is actually really not even our main priority or revenue source anymore. And in the digital space, it's a completely different set of circumstances. And sports moves the needle big time in the digital space in terms of readership and digital subscriptions. So that's why, plus it's just people are interested in it. And so we're following the audience when it comes to sports coverage and making that coverage a priority. We've also got great sports reporters who do a good job and justify the travel because they produce great work. They get exclusives. People like reading stuff. They have very strong followings. All of those things that you want to build, our sports reporters do. We've got a terrific sports staff. They're well worth the investment, by the way. But for news, yes, our main focus is the St. Louis region. We don't generally travel too much for news stories. But if there's a great news story that we think can allow us to do compelling journalism, we'll travel for it.
And as far as the staff goes, I know that areas where for a long time the paper used to have specialists, like a full-time religion writer, a full-time food writer, full-time science writer. They used to do more reviews of local arts presentations. When you decide on the types of cuts you have to make, what factors are involved?
So yes, there was a time, and not just us, by the way, this is true across the newspaper industry. So yes, highly specialized writers like a religion writer, or of course, Brian Miller, who was the longtime orchestra critic and writer here. After she passed away, that position really wasn't replaced. First of all, finding a specialist who's really good in these very niche topics is not easy to do. And we've been lucky in past years when we had folks who had a hyper kind of focused specialty in those topics. But yes, you start to decide, okay, we need to do stories that will hit on the largest possible audience. And it is maybe very difficult to find a specialist in this very particular topic. And so you make some painful decisions about, we're not going to have a dedicated writer just for this one topic. That doesn't mean we ignore the topic. So we still cover the arts. We still cover theater. We still cover the symphony. It's not like we stopped covering these topics. If there's a big religion story, which there is right now with the Catholic Diocese, and it's all things new, reorganization plan, we are covering that like no one else in town is covering it. So when there is still a big story, we'll cover it, even if we don't have it necessarily someone designated as a specialist in that topic. It doesn't mean we can't still cover it. It doesn't mean a smart journalist can't learn and still do great, compelling work. So, yeah, you make painful decisions over just to say, well, we can't have these 10 folks covering these 10 topics. So you do make some painful decisions there. But you don't want to also just say, well, we're not covering this at all anymore. So we'll still cover those topics when there's compelling stories or we have an opportunity to. So yes, the staff is smaller and we've had to reprioritize. Maybe we don't cover quite as much, but you're hedging your bets on we can still do great work in this way and in these areas.
Let me ask you about the effect of COVID. Are most of your reporters back working in the office? And just in general, I mean, what was gained, what was lost, what was changed as a result of the way the pandemic affected the paper?
I think like with all offices, there was this great realization, the idea of cramming everyone to an office 40 hours a week or more wasn't necessarily the only model to follow. And so we've got, majority of the folks, I would say, certainly on the news side, most of those reporters are in on a regular basis, but we've become a lot more relaxed with, hey, work from home today or work from home this week. The reality is with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, you can file a story from just about anywhere. You can report a story from just about anywhere, unless it's a very specific event. Sports reporters were never really in the office all that much anyways. For them, it really wasn't a change. Many of our features and arts reporters kind of had loose schedules, not necessarily built around the office because they are at arts events or concerts, et cetera, et cetera. So for them, I think it was a less dramatic change. For news and editorial, it was probably opened up more possibilities. We still have a good number of people in on a regular basis, so our newsroom looks active at any given time if you were to come in. But certainly it's not the kind of packed, busy office atmosphere you saw in years past. Now, I would say that a newsroom does benefit from that being physically with colleagues, being able to interact, talk, exchange ideas, brainstorm. I don't think it's ideal in a newsroom journalism environment to have everyone working remotely all the time. I think there's value to that exchange of ideas. Hey, let's brainstorm a headline. I heard this. What did you hear? I have this idea. What do you think? Those kinds of conversations, that kind of camaraderie, it's very difficult to do when you're all on screens like this. And so I think there is benefit to having some level of office collaboration, in-office collaboration. Does it need to be every day for 8 hours a day? No, I think COVID taught us you don't quite need that. But I don't think you want to go completely remote either.
How do the modern issues about the press's credibility affect the way you go about your business?
It's made our job very, very challenging because there has been a sustained strategic attack on press credibility over the last several years. It's been done for self-serving interests. I think half the people railing about the media and the press don't even believe what they're saying. They're just doing to score cheap political points. But it has, for a certain percentage of the population, ingrained this thought or belief that all of our work somehow reflects some sort of political bias, or even more toxic, that it's just wrong or made up, or that we're somehow fabricating or distorting facts, which we do not do. So this whole fake news nonsense, which started out as a term to talk about a Russian misinformation campaign on social media, has been distorted and thrown back at legitimate media to somehow denigrate our work, make it lose credibility. It's, again, a certain percentage of the audience here in St. Louis has believed this because they've heard it enough times. So they look at our work, and many of them think, well, somehow this is distorted or this is fabricated. And it's not. We are trying to hold ourselves to the same ethical standards we always have. We try to train people as well as we can. We look for people who are already well trained, who are ethical, who want to be independent, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a mountain you have to climb with some leaders. And the best we can do is just keep producing great, unbiased work, and hope that that cuts through the clutter, which it does for many people. But yeah, it can feel like an uphill climb some days where it's like fake news, fake news, fake news. We don't believe what you're writing. It's like, well, they're the facts. We're presenting you facts. Sorry, they're the facts. It's not our version of the truth. It's just the truth. And we're trying. That doesn't mean we're perfect. We make mistakes. That's why we have clarifications and corrections. We'll have mistakes. We're human. There'll be oversights. We'll have blind spots. Once they are called to our attention, we'll pivot. We'll correct as needed. We still have a clarification correction policy. We'll do follow-up stories if we missed something. But at the end of the day, our job is to present facts in an unvarnished way and the truth as best as we can decipher it and get to it. And we work very hard to find data and do interviews and look at the facts to present them to an audience. Someone wants to label that fake news. I don't know what I can do other than say, no, these are the actual facts. This is the actual work.
And I guess Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram don't make it any easier, do they?
No, because the stuff gets circulated very irresponsibly. And, people see a headline on Facebook or they see a tweet and they assume it's true. And this is a discussion I've had with my kids who are teenagers or young adults, which is it's so much harder to be a news consumer these days because it's, stuff just runs across your screen. And it's very hard to decipher what's real, what's not, what's distorted. And I tell my kids, you can't just assume it's true. You have to follow it to the source. Look at the link, look at the byline, look at the news source. And if the story sounds too crazy to be true, it probably is too crazy to be true. So you've got to be a very careful consumer of news. That's difficult because that means investing time and actually working to understand where a story is coming from. It's hard. A lot of people don't want to invest the time to do that. It's why sticking to credible sources like the St. Louis Post-Dispatch makes that easier for you because we come with a brand that has lasted for decades and we stand for certain principles. And so I tell my kids all the time, you got to be careful. There's just so much junk rolling across your screen. What's real, what's not, it can be very hard to decipher. So yeah, I would say in this era, so much information is out there, but as a news consumer, it means you have to be that much more discerning.
So if we can look at the future briefly, obviously the ascendancy of online is going to continue, and probably the problems with print are also going to continue. How is a 7-day print product on its way out, you think? What's the paper going to look like in 5 years?
So many newspaper companies have already backed off of 7 days a week. So Gannett, for example, which is currently the largest newspaper owner in America, in most of its markets, stopped doing home delivery and stopped essentially printing a Saturday paper. Now, they still produce an e-edition. For those who don't know, that's an electronic replica of the newspaper. It's literally the pages of the newspaper that you can call up on a screen. And you can click on a story and it brings a story up. It functions as an app, basically, but it is an electronic replica of the actual newspaper pages. So Gannett, in most markets on Saturdays, went to e-edition only. Other newspaper companies have announced we're not going to publish in print 7 days a week anymore, or even not at all. They're going completely either e-edition or website or app. I'm not breaking news. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch is still 7 days a week in print. We've talked a lot in this industry for years about is there a future where maybe the Sunday paper is really the print edition that survives and becomes more of a magazine focusing on features and analysis, week of labs, and then the rest of the days you're online. That's one model people are talking about. My hometown, Cleveland, the Plain Dealer, years ago went where they're only publishing home delivery on, I think it's Wednesdays, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they already eliminated 3 or 4 days. And so Detroit eliminated Mondays and Tuesdays in print, home delivery at least, many, many years ago. And so you already have seen for a long time now different models that don't involve 7 days a week in print. And newspaper companies, we have to face this reality. We know that audience is not growing. It's very expensive to print and deliver a newspaper. We know that the audience is growing by leaps and bounds on the digital platforms. So our challenge with a lot of our print readers is saying, look, check out the e-edition, check out the app, check out the website. It's all the same information. And as a print subscriber, you can actually get it for free. Check it out. Maybe you'll learn to follow us on these platforms. And the e-edition, by the way, which has a growing audience, is a happy medium because, again, it looks like the newspaper. It's the actual newspaper pages, but functions like an app. And a lot of people find that to be a pretty practical way of making that transition. Now, you have to print out the puzzles on a printer. If you want to do the puzzles, I'll grant you that. That's a bit of an annoyance. But we're trying to meet people halfway there. Yeah, I don't know, Dale. Had you asked me 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even a year ago, my answer would be different than today. So I'm done looking to the future. And, a lot of people 10 years ago were saying newspapers wouldn't even be at all in print anymore. Well, here we are. We're still in print. We're still being thrown on driveways. So those predictions were all wrong. But I can't look that far down the road other than to say, a lot of people are experimenting with different models that are less than 7 days a week. And we really are working hard to try to get people to follow us on some of these electronic platforms because that is really the future.
And as part of a larger organization, in your case, Lee Enterprises, those decisions, I guess, are not necessarily made here in St. Louis, right?
That is correct. So we are owned by Lee Enterprises. That kind of decision certainly would be informed and they would seek our opinion, but ultimately the decision would be made by Lee on that. Yeah.
And I guess the standardization of what's gone into everyday in recent months is an example of how that works.
Yeah. So I know we heard from a lot of readers on that. The everyday section, which is our comics and puzzles section, Lee went to standard pages. All newspapers had different comics and different puzzles. And Lee said, look, we're spending a lot of money, people using all these different comics. Also for our page designers, it was a lot of logistical work, making sure this comic page for this newspaper was causing a lot of logistical issues. And so they said, for efficiency and of course, cost savings, we're going to go to standardized comic and puzzles pages in print. Now, again, I keep talking about the e-edition. There are like 3 or 4 extra pages of comics available on the e-edition, by the way, as well as our website. So if you really wanted some of your old favorites or much more comics, you can do it. if you're on the e-edition or if you go on the website and you're a subscriber and you log in. So we are providing extras to people in the electronic, again, trying to get people to move to these electronic platforms. But yes, that was an example where corporate saw an opportunity to make things more efficient. And so that decision was made for us. We heard from a lot of readers about it. But that is an example of a decision that did come from our parent company that we had to implement. So yes, that's an example.
But even there, you were able to make some changes because of comments from local readers.
So the New York Times crossword puzzle crowd came out like no other. I know people were mad about certain comics. People were mad about certain puzzles. If there's any New York Times crossword fans listening on this, boy, were you a loud bunch. And so we did bring back the New York Times crossword. We brought back another puzzle too. I'm forgetting which one exactly, but there were two, but it was New York Times crossword and everything else.
It was the crypto quip.
Crypto quip. We also, that was the number two.
Thank
so it was
you very
New York
much.
Times crossword and the crypto quip crowd. We heard you. We brought those back. Then we started hearing from individual fans of individual comics. To be honest with you, there wasn't a great pattern that emerged there. People had different. The two that were consistent were New York Times crossword by a country mile, and then crypto quip. So we did bring those two back. New York Times crossword fans were very happy that we did that. So yes, we were able to make some local adjustments based on what the audience was telling us, which was a great win for those folks.
But Alan, I really appreciate you taking the time. We covered a lot of information. Before I let you go, any closing statement?
No, I just thanks for taking the time, Dale. And as I mentioned, yes, we are still in this period of transition where we're trying to still produce a print edition, but also understanding where the digital future is taking us. And so I thank everyone for their patience because it's been a bumpy road. We think we're getting a little smoother at it. The important thing is that you read us, whether you're reading us in the newspaper, whether you're reading us on your iPad, your laptop, or your phone. We appreciate that. We appreciate the audience. Believe me when I tell you we are working very, very hard every day to produce great journalism. Sometimes we succeed on some days more than others, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to live up to the words that Joseph Pulitzer left us in 1907. And hopefully on more days than not, we accomplish that mission. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dale, for taking the time to do this.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much, Alan.
All right, take care. Bye.